May 9, 2000. Bear Brook State Park, Allenstown, New Hampshire. A search team moves through the trees in near silence. They are not here by chance. They came back on purpose because one investigator refused to believe that everything had already been found. 15 years had passed since the first discovery. 15 years since those woods gave up their first secret. But Trooper John Cody had a feeling. He moves the team through the underbrush. Methodical, slow, eyes on the ground. And then one of them stops, kneels down, brushes away a thick layer of leaves and dead growth. There it is. Another barrel, same rusted steel, same corroded lid. Sitting just 100 feet from the first one, as if it had been waiting there all along. And when they open it, the case that had already broken everyone who touched it gets exponentially worse. The first barrel was found in 1985. This one had been sitting 100 feet away the entire time. How does that happen, and what does it mean? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning. The Bear Brook murders. Bear Brook State Park, Allenstown, New Hampshire. 4 victims, 2 barrels, no names. No missing persons reports that matched. No answers for over 30 years. This is not a case that gets solved in a single breakthrough moment. This is a case that gets solved in pieces, slowly, painfully, across decades, by a librarian in Connecticut, a genealogist with a database that didn't exist when these women died, investigators who refused to file this away and forget it, and DNA science so new that it barely had a name when the bodies were first found. The last victim in this case was finally identified in September 2025. Most outlets covering this story don't even know that yet. Stay with me through this entire video, because the final chapter of this case, the one that just closed, is the most devastating part of the whole story. And you need to hear all of it to understand what it means. So don't go anywhere. Let's start in 1985. It is deer hunting season, November 10th, 1985. 2 brothers are moving through Bear Brook State Park. Not on any marked trail, but deep in the woods the way hunters go. Far from the parking lot, far from the picnic areas, far from anything resembling a path. One of them notices something out of place. A 55-gallon metal drum. Industrial size, the kind used for chemicals or oil. Rusted, old, tipped on its side. Half buried beneath a thick mat of fallen leaves near the charred remains of an old burned-down store. It has clearly been there for a long time. He moves closer, he looks inside, and his stomach drops. A foot. Human remains. He stumbles backward and calls for his brother. They do not touch anything else. They do not move the barrel. They leave immediately, pushing back through the woods as fast as they can, and they report it to the Allenstown Police Department. Officers arrive within the hour. Inside the barrel, wrapped tightly in plastic, are the skeletal remains of 2 people. A woman, estimated age 23 to 33 years old. A young girl, estimated age 5 to 11 years old. Both bodies are severely decomposed, nearly completely skeletonized. Medical examiners determined that both died from blunt force trauma to the head. Someone had beaten them to death, and then dismembered them. Carefully, methodically, with time and privacy. Then wrapped the pieces in plastic, packed them into this drum, drove out to a remote section of a New Hampshire state park, and left them there. This was not a crime of passion. This was not a moment of chaos or panic. This took planning. This took deliberateness. This took a level of cold calculation that investigators immediately recognized as the signature of someone who had done something like this before, or at least had spent considerable time thinking about how to do it without being caught. Based on the decomposition, forensic examiners estimate the 2 had been dead for years, possibly since the late 1970s, maybe the early 1980s. Their bodies had been lying in those woods in that drum for somewhere between 4 and 10 years before anyone found them. And here is the detail that stops you in your tracks. Nobody had been looking for them. Investigators run every missing persons report from the 1970s and the 1980s. Nothing matches. Dental records lead nowhere. Facial reconstructions are created, carefully rendered images of what the woman and child may have looked like in life. They are circulated through media, shown in newspapers, broadcast on local television, sent to law enforcement agencies across the country. No one calls, no one comes forward. Nobody knows who these people are. And so, with nowhere left to turn, the woman and the child are given a burial in a local Allenstown cemetery. And they are given a headstone. I want you to read this slowly. Here lie the mortal remains, known only to God, of a woman aged 23 to 33 and a girl child aged 8 to 10. Their slain bodies were found on November 10, 1985, in Bear Brook State Park. May their souls find peace in God's loving care. Known only to God. Think about what that means for a moment. This woman was somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, possibly somebody's mother, and based on what investigators would later discover, she absolutely was. She had a name she'd carried her whole life. She had a birthday. She had a voice. She had people who loved her. And the best that the state of New Hampshire could do for her in 1985 was carve 4 words into a piece of granite. Known only to God, that tombstone is not closure. It is a placeholder. It is a public admission that the system had run out of tools. But it is also, whether anyone intended it this way or not, a promise. Because somebody was going to keep trying. The file goes into storage. Investigators move on, because investigators always move on. There are other cases, active cases, cases with witnesses and evidence and names. This one has none of those things, and in 1985, that meant it was over. But forensic science did not stand still. Through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, DNA technology advanced at a pace that nobody had anticipated. What had seemed like science fiction in 1985 was becoming routine in university labs and federal crime facilities by the mid-90s. Scientists could now extract usable genetic material from degraded bone fragments, from teeth, from rootless hair shafts that had been sitting in evidence bags for a decade. Cold case units across America began dusting off old files and resubmitting evidence for analysis. In New Hampshire, a new generation of investigators had grown up hearing about the Bear Brook case, and one of them, New Hampshire State Police Trooper John Cody, became quietly obsessed with it. He believed something had been missed. Not out of any criticism of the 1985 investigators, resources were limited. Technology was limited. The search that was conducted in 1985 was the best search that 1985 could offer. But Cody believed the woods had more to say. In the spring of 2000, he organized a return to Bear Brook State Park. A thorough, methodical, modern search of the original crime scene area. His instincts were right. They just had no idea how right. Before we get to what Trooper Cody's team found in those woods, and I want you mentally prepared, because it hits hard, let me ask you something. What's the weather like where you are today? Drop it in the comments. And if you are new here, welcome to the Crime Daily series. Hit subscribe. Now back to those woods. May 9th, 2000. The search team fans out across the area surrounding the original discovery site. They are moving in a grid pattern. Slow, disciplined, covering ground that was walked in 1985, but perhaps not closely enough. 100 feet, that is the distance. 100 feet from where the first barrel had been found 15 years earlier. Close enough that a person standing at the first site, looking in the right direction, might have seen it through the trees. Another 55-gallon metal drum, same brand, same rusted steel, same corroded lid, they open it. Inside are the remains of two more young girls, both wrapped in plastic, both dismembered, both killed by blunt force trauma to the head. Forensic analysis would later estimate they had been dead since somewhere between 1977 and 1981, roughly the same window as the woman and child from the first barrel. 4 victims, all murdered by the same person, all dumped in the same remote stretch of New Hampshire forest. And that second barrel had been sitting there 100 feet away, undisturbed, for the entire 15 years that the first case had been open, cold, and unsolved. The question that settled over every officer at that scene like a physical weight: how did we miss this? The honest answer is complicated and not really anyone's fault. The 1985 search was conducted with the tools and the resources of 1985. No ground-penetrating radar, no cadaver dogs trained to the standard they are today, no GPS mapping of search grids. A barrel buried beneath years of accumulated leaf cover in dense woodland 100 feet off the original site, it was missed. It happened, but knowing why it was missed did not make it easier to accept, because now the nature of this case had fundamentally changed. This was no longer a double homicide with unknown victims. This was the work of a serial killer. Someone who had the time, the access, and the cold-blooded precision to murder 4 human beings, a woman and 3 children, transport their bodies to a remote location, pack them into industrial drums, and walk away without anyone ever knowing. Someone who had lived among regular people in regular towns and done this. And for 23 years, they had gotten away with it completely. If you've made it this far, you already know this is not a normal case. I need you to do one thing right now. Like this video. Here is why it matters on a case like this. The more people who see this story, the more people learn these women's names, and these 4 victims spent decades without their names. Like the video. Share it. Let's make sure they are not forgotten. Now, the science that changed everything. By the early 2000s, forensic DNA technology had caught up with the Bear Brook case. Scientists could now extract viable genetic profiles from degraded bone fragments and teeth that had been sitting in evidence storage for nearly 2 decades. New Hampshire investigators submitted all 4 victims' remains for analysis. The results came back in layers, and each layer made the story stranger. First revelation: the woman from Barrel 1 and the oldest child from Barrel 1 were biologically related. Mother and daughter. That made sense. They had been found together, and investigators had always suspected a family connection. Second revelation: the youngest girl from Barrel 2 was also biologically connected to the woman, another daughter. So here was a mother murdered alongside 2 of her children, distributed across 2 separate barrels, left in those woods to rot. Third revelation, and this is the one that stopped everyone cold. The remaining girl, the one investigators would come to call the middle child, showed no biological connection to any of the other 3 victims. No connection to the woman, no connection to the other girls. 4 bodies dumped in the same location by the same killer in the same time window, and one of them was a complete stranger to the others. How? Why? Investigators had no answer yet, but that anomaly would eventually lead them somewhere they never expected. Isotope testing added another dimension. By analyzing trace minerals in the victim's bones and teeth, minerals absorbed from local food and water during childhood, scientists could estimate where a person had lived during their early years. The results for all 4 victims pointed to the same region, the southwestern United States, California, possibly Arizona or Texas. These women and children were not from New Hampshire. They had come from across the country. Then came the tool that would finally break this case open. In the mid-2010s, consumer DNA companies like Ancestry and 23andMe had built something extraordinary almost by accident. Massive voluntary databases of genetic information from millions of ordinary Americans tracing their family histories. Law enforcement began using those databases to identify cold case victims and unknown suspects through a process called genetic genealogy. In 2017, genetic genealogist Rae-Venter was brought onto the Bear Brook case. She uploaded the victims' DNA profiles into public genealogy databases and began building family trees, tracing distant relatives, following genetic breadcrumbs back through generations. And at almost exactly the same moment, in a library in Connecticut, a woman named Heath was doing the same thing with nothing but a laptop, an internet connection, and years of quiet determination. Heath had been following the Bear Brook case for years, haunted by it the way a lot of people get haunted by cases that don't make sense. She combed through online missing persons forums, message boards, ancestry sites. She was looking for anything. In 2000, she found a post on an ancestry.com forum. Someone was searching for a woman named Marlyse Honeychurch and her daughter, missing since 1978. Last seen leaving Puente, California around Thanksgiving of that year with her daughters and a man named Bob Evans. Heath reached out. She learned more. Rae-Venter, working independently through the DNA, arrived at the same place. The woman in Barrel 1 was Marlyse Honeychurch. The daughters in Barrels 1 and 2 were Vaughn and Sarah McWaters. All 3 had vanished from California in 1978. They had been missing for over 30 years, but who was Bob Evans? Investigators pulled the thread. In Manchester, New Hampshire, in the early 1980s, a man named Bob Evans worked as an electrician at a local mill. He was arrested 3 times in 1980, writing bad checks, theft, illegally diverting electricity. Nothing serious. The kind of arrests that barely register. During one of those bookings, a woman named Elizabeth Evans was listed as his wife. Investigators believe Elizabeth was Marlyse Honeychurch, living in New Hampshire under a new name with a man who had given her one. But Bob Evans wasn't his real name either. Fingerprint analysis began connecting the dots across state lines and across decades. In 1985, a man was arrested in California under the name Curtis Kimball, drunk driving and child endangerment. In 1986, living in Scotts Valley, California, a man calling himself Gordon Jensen abandoned a 5-year-old girl at an RV park and walked away. In 1988, a man was arrested as Jerry Mockerman for driving a stolen vehicle. In the late 1990s, the same fingerprints resurfaced under the name Rae-Venter, Curtis Kimball, Gordon Jensen, Jerry Mockerman, Rae-Venter, Bob Evans. The same man. Sit with that for a second. This man had constructed and discarded at least 5 confirmed identities across multiple states over multiple decades. Each name was a fresh start. Each new location was a clean slate. And in between those names, in the gaps, in the white spaces on the timeline, were the bodies. Not one law enforcement database had connected all of these identities to the same set of fingerprints. Not until now. Quick pause. Where are you watching from right now? I genuinely want to know. Drop your city in the comments. Because right now people are watching this from Houston, from Portland, from some small town in Ohio at midnight, all sitting with the same case at the same time. That means something to me. Tell me where you are, and stay with me, because what comes next changes everything. Rae-Venter did not stop at identifying the victims. She turned the same genealogical methodology, the same painstaking process of building family trees through genetic databases, tracing thousands of distant relatives across generations, toward the killer himself. DNA from crime scene evidence was uploaded. The search began. In August 2017, she found the name Terry Peter Rasmussen, born in Denver, Colorado, 1943, married, 4 children. By all external appearances, a man who had lived a normal life in a normal American town until 1974, when he walked away from his wife and children in Arizona and simply ceased to exist. His family had not heard from him in over 40 years. Investigators contacted his living children. His son agreed to provide a DNA sample. The results came back, positive match. Terry Rasmussen was Bob Evans. Terry Rasmussen was Curtis Kimball, Gordon Jensen, Jerry Mockerman, Rae-Venter. Terry Rasmussen was the Bear Brook killer. And now, with his real identity confirmed, investigators could finally build the full timeline. Rasmussen met Marlyse Honeychurch in California in the late 1970s. He moved her and her daughters to New Hampshire, where he reinvented himself as Bob Evans and found work as an electrician. Somewhere between 1978 and 1981, in whatever home or space they occupied in Manchester, He murdered Marlyse, her 2 daughters, and his own biological child. He packed their bodies into drums and drove them to a remote section of Bear Brook State Park. He left them there. And then he drove away and became someone else. Now here is where this story delivers the particular cruelty that only real life is capable of. Terry Rasmussen did not escape justice in the way we usually mean that phrase. He did not spend the rest of his life free and comfortable and untouched. In 2002, living in Richmond, California under the name Rae-Venter, he murdered his girlfriend, Yoon Soon-jun. He buried her body in the basement of their home, under cat litter. That crime was discovered. He was arrested, charged, and convicted. He died in a California state prison on December 28, 2010. He was serving that sentence when Rae-Venter found his name in a genealogy database in 2017. He never knew investigators were looking at him for Bear Brook. He never confessed. He never said a single word about what he had done to those 4 people in New Hampshire. He took everything to his grave. What time is it where you are right now? Seriously, drop it in the comments. Because I think about people watching this at 2 in the morning, sitting alone with the full weight of this case. These 4 victims deserve to be witnessed at every hour, in every time zone. What time is it there? By 2017, 3 of the 4 victims had names: Marlyse Honeychurch, Vaughn, Sarah McWaters. But the middle child, the one whose DNA showed no biological connection to the others, the one who turned out to be Terry Rasmussen's own daughter, still had nothing. No name, no missing persons report, no family member who had ever filed a report searching for her. She was estimated to be between 2 and 4 years old when she was killed. 2 to 4 years old, she had brown hair, a slight overbite, a small gap between her 2 front teeth. Forensic artists had created reconstructions of her face, the face of a toddler essentially, and circulated them for years. Nobody came forward. Rasmussen had never mentioned her to anyone. Not to his first wife. Not to his children from that marriage. Not to any of the women he'd lived with and abandoned across the country over 3 decades. Not a single person in his life knew this child had ever existed. He had erased her completely. And for years, investigators had no idea where to even begin looking for her identity. Because to identify a child, you usually need to find the mother. And Rasmussen had never given anyone the mother's name either. In January 2024, the New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Unit partnered with the DNA Doe Project, a nonprofit organization specializing in using genetic genealogy to identify unknown individuals. Genetic genealogist Jennifer Randolph and her team began the work, 18 months of it. They traced the child's DNA back through generations, following genetic connections through public databases, building and rebuilding family trees, following every thread until it either snapped or held. They found a couple born in the 1870s. From there, they traced their descendants forward, through children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, until they found a 2005 obituary. A woman survived by a daughter named Pepper Reed, born 1952, originally from Texas. Investigators searched for Pepper Reed. Nothing after the late 1970s. She had simply vanished. But with her name, they found something else. A birth certificate from Orange County, California. A baby girl born 1976, father Terry Rasmussen, mother Pepper Reed. On September 5, 2025, DNA testing with a surviving member of Pepper Reed's family confirmed it. The middle child's name was Rae Rasmussen. She was between 2 and 4 years old when her father murdered her. He stuffed her body in a barrel alongside another child and left her in the woods like something disposable. There are no known photographs of Rae Rasmussen. Her face exists only in forensic reconstructions, the careful work of artists trying to give features to a child who never got the chance to grow into them. A life that barely began. Erased by the one person in the world who was supposed to keep her safe. Terry Rasmussen did not begin with Bear Brook, and he did not end there. His trail of destruction stretched across America for over 3 decades, and the full scope of it may never be known. 1974, Rasmussen walks away from his wife and 4 children in Arizona. No warning, no explanation. He simply disappears. 1975, he resurfaces in Texas under his real name, working on oil rigs in the Houston area. That is where he meets Pepper Reed, 24 years old, full of life. By Christmas of that year, she is pregnant with his child. Her family sees her for the last time at the holidays. After that, nothing. She is never heard from again. Investigators believe she is one of his victims. Her body has never been found, late 1970s. Rasmussen is in California, now operating as Terry Rasmussen again when he meets Marlyse Honeychurch. He moves her and her daughters across the country to New Hampshire and becomes Bob Evans, 1978-1981. The Bear Brook murders, 4 victims, 2 barrels, the woods outside Allenstown, November 1981. He leaves New Hampshire, but not alone. He departs with a woman named Denise Bawden and her 6-month-old daughter, Dawn. Denise is never seen again. Rasmussen keeps Dawn for 5 years, calling her Lisa, presenting her as his own child, until 1986 when he abandons her at an RV park in Scotts Valley, California under the name Gordon Jensen and walks away. Dawn survived. She was placed in foster care, later adopted, and grew up not knowing her real name or her real story. She didn't learn the truth until 2016, decades after the man who stole her childhood was already dead. 2002. Now living in Richmond, California as Rae-Venter, Rasmussen murders his girlfriend Yoon Jun and buries her in the basement of their home. This is the crime that finally puts him behind bars. December 28, 2010. He dies in prison. He was never charged with the Bear Brook murders. He was never charged with the murder of Pepper Reed, or Denise Bowden, or Yoon Jun's full case history, or any of the other unnamed women investigators suspect may be out there. He died having never been fully held accountable for any of it. After 30 years, after a librarian with an internet connection, a genealogist with a database, investigators who came back to those woods when everyone else had moved on. Marlyse Honeychurch, Vaughn, Sarah McWaters, and Ray Rasmussen finally have their names back. Their families can grieve them properly now. They are no longer known only to God. But this case is not closed. Not really. Not fully. Pepper Reed, Ray's mother, the woman Terry Rasmussen met in Texas in 1975, has never been found. Her family lost her in the late 1970s. Investigators believe she was one of his victims. Where her body is, if it still exists, is unknown. Her case remains active. Denise Bowden, last seen with Rasmussen in Manchester, New Hampshire in November 1981, has never been found either. She is presumed murdered. Her daughter Dawn survived. Denise did not. And then there is the question that no one can fully answer. How many more? Terry Rasmussen lived under at least 5 confirmed identities across at least 6 states over more than 3 decades. He was a man who murdered people and disappeared. That was the pattern. That was how he operated. The women named here, Marlyse, Pepper, Denise, Yoon, those are the ones investigators have been able to connect to him through evidence and DNA. The ones who haven't been connected yet are the ones who keep investigators awake at night. Rasmussen died in 2010. He took every secret he had with him. And somewhere out there, in some state, in some patch of ground or body of water, there may be more barrels. More names waiting to be found. Thank you for watching.